From the air, the Mississippi Delta looks like land that should keep growing. A giant river still reaches the Gulf, still carries mud, and still spreads across one of the most famous coasts in North America. But the strange truth of this landscape is that new sediment is only part of the story. Much of the delta is sinking even while the river keeps arriving. To understand why, you have to stop seeing the delta as a finished place. It is a low, soft platform built from layers of mud, organic matter, abandoned channels, and waterlogged wetlands. That kind of ground is productive, but it is also temporary. Delta plains rise when sediment arrives faster than the surface drops. They begin to fail when subsidence, erosion, levees, canals, storms, and rising water start outpacing that supply. The Mississippi built this plain over thousands of years by switching course and creating overlapping delta lobes. Each lobe pushed sediment outward for a time, then lost river input when the channel jumped somewhere else. Once a lobe was cut off from fresh sediment, compaction and drowning became much harder to resist. That deep history still matters because the modern delta sits on young, compressible deposits. Soft sediment squeezes tighter under its own weight. Organic soils shrink as they dry, oxidize, or break down. Water can no longer spread across the plain the way it once did because levees keep much of the river in a tighter corridor. The system still carries sediment, but much less of it reaches the wetlands that most need rebuilding. In other words, the river is present without fully nourishing the land it once created. That is one reason the delta can look active on a map and yet lose elevation in practice. Another reason is that relative sea level here is not controlled by the ocean alone. The surface itself is moving downward. When subsidence is added to global sea level rise, the effective water challenge becomes much larger. Wetlands that once sat high enough to support plants can spend too much time flooded. Once vegetation weakens, root structure weakens with it. Then waves, currents, and storms can strip away marsh edges much more easily. People often imagine land loss as simple shoreline erosion. In the delta, some of the most important change begins from below the surface. The ground compacts, drainage shifts, salinity changes, and the platform loses the elevation margin that kept it alive. Human engineering amplified that vulnerability. Levees protected navigation and communities, but they also reduced the overbank flooding that used to spread fresh mud across the delta plain. Navigation canals and local hydrologic changes altered water movement in ways that stressed wetlands further. None of this means there is one villain or one single switch that caused collapse. The delta is failing through a stacked system of pressures, not through one neat explanation. That matters because simplistic stories produce simplistic solutions. Rebuilding land here is not just about dumping sediment somewhere near the coast. It is about reconnecting river water, sediment, wetland plants, and elevation gain in places that can actually retain them. Scientists watch this through cores, elevation measurements, satellite change detection, wetland surveys, and long records of land loss. Those tools show that the delta is not just eroding at the edge. It is reorganizing as a living plain that can drown, fragment, or rebuild depending on how water and sediment are managed. The wider lesson is bigger than Louisiana. Deltas everywhere depend on a fragile balance between supply, subsidence, and rising water. When that balance breaks, land can disappear even in landscapes built by the world's great rivers. Peat-rich marsh soils can lose strength when flooding patterns and salinity patterns shift for long enough. So even small changes in elevation can have outsized effects in a landscape that already sits close to sea level. Storms matter here, but they usually do their worst damage in places that were already losing resilience. The delta's vulnerability is written into both its deep sediments and its modern engineering. That is why restoration plans often focus on controlled sediment diversions rather than relying on shoreline repair alone. The real goal is to rebuild the vertical strength of the plain, not just redraw the edge of the coast.